Hi, this is Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, here with some post-fight comments on David Haye's knockout win over Audley Harrison. This video is a must-watch, and I mean a must-watch. In particular, the third round is a must-watch for anyone who wants to try to figure out the heavyweight champion, David Haye. That third round shows you the best and the worst of David Haye. Let me just make a couple of points to frame it to get us to the third round. In the first two rounds, many people have said that Audley Harrison showed a lack of heart. He is in a heavyweight title fight. He didn't jump on David Haye. He hardly threw any punches. Let me just tell you, Audley did about as good as he could under the circumstances. What was Audley to do? Let's say you're Audley Harrison, right? You're much taller than David Haye. He is standing outside of your jab, right? That's the secret with Haye. He stands very far away from you. So he's outside of your jab. You understand that the only way David Haye lands punches is if he leaps in from way outside, which is less likely than if he leaps in to counter you if you throw an errant punch. So Audley Harrison didn't want to throw a jab. He didn't want to throw anything because if he threw it, David Haye was going to leap in and counter him with something hard, right? So Audley is standing around the first two rounds, in my opinion, looking at David Haye, trying to figure out exactly how to bridge the distance between the two of them. Let me point out that that's common when you're fighting a Roy Jones style fighter, right? Because David Haye hits hard, has blinding hand speed, right? Audley Harrison did not want to make the mistake that Enzo Maccarinelli made against David Haye of just blindly allowing David Haye to counter him until David Haye was able to land some big shots and take him out. So it's a cat and mouse game. Keep in mind, too, and I've said this in an earlier video, David Haye is a reactionary fighter, right? He doesn't like to take the lead. Look at David Haye fights, what he prefers to do. He's not one to hunt you down. He prefers to be hunted. This is just like Ali. So Audley Harrison is trying to get David Haye to take the lead. I believe what Audley was trying to do was to get David Haye to move forward, to come inside, to literally get out of his comfort zone of staying away from guys and reacting to what they do, then leaping in, just like he did in the 12th round against Valuev, right? Just like he did in the Enzo fight, right? Just like he did in the John Ruiz fight, right? Audley Harrison didn't want to fight like John Ruiz because he knew that if he came forward, he would be playing into David Haye's hands. Haye would just simply back away, stay outside the range of his punches. Then as soon as Audley threw a jab, Haye would duck the jab, leap inside, and start throwing hard punches. Now that's exactly what happened in the third round. Now, the third round's interesting. I've said in prior videos, and keep in mind, I picked Haye to win this fight. I'm not hating on Haye, but we all have strengths and weaknesses. And I've said in past videos that I don't believe David Haye can fight inside. Let me also say I don't believe Vladimir Klitschko can fight inside either. In the third round, you saw that in real time. David Haye jumps inside after Audley throws some punch that Haye counters, right? Haye jumps inside, hurts Audley Harrison. Harrison goes over to the ropes. Now, let me just tell you how some guys would have handled this, right? Mike Tyson would then step inside, start throwing wicked body shots and uppercuts, literally giving the guy the business while he's on the ropes. Take a look at Tyson against Frank Bruno, right? Tyson was especially devastating on the inside against taller fighters, right? George Foreman, a bigger man, would literally pin the guy on the ropes using his shoulders and then would just wail away. Joe Frazier, shorter guy, same type thing, right? Those are guys who fight inside. You saw an inside exhibition a few fights ago when Andre Ward took apart Alan Green inside, using his shoulders to literally pin Alan. Right as Alan Green tries to grab his hands, Andre Ward was hitting him with his free hand. Right, he knew he had Alan Green hurt up on the ropes. Right, you saw it more recently, ironically, again in a fight involving Alan Green, when Glenn Johnson, another guy, and we'll get to him later, another guy who knows how to fight inside, got inside on Alan Green and just wouldn't give him enough room to breathe. Right here, David Haye hurts Audley Harrison. He's badly hurt. He slumps on the ropes. David Haye is inside throwing power shots. Then what does he do? He stops fighting. He has to reset. He takes a step back. Look at the video. Third round. It's astonishing. He takes a step back, resets on a guy he has hurt on the ropes. Haye, of course, has to back out about 2 feet so that he can start his routine all over again. In other words, David Haye is not a guy who, can just back you up and then start, putting his forearm on your chest while he's hitting you, tying up your hands, tying you up. That's not David Haye. David Haye is a guy who likes to be outside. In fact, he likes to be outside your jab. Then he feints. When you, either throw a punch that he can counter, or when you go for the wrong feint, then David Haye jumps in. He's only inside while you're defenseless, right? David Haye, of course, ends the fight a little bit later, but again, look at the film. Haye, of course, after backing away from a hurt Audley, then jumps back in later in that round, just shortly after that, is able to hit Audley several times, knock Audley down. By the way, the knockdown is a little bit dirty. If you look closely at that last combination, you're going to see David Haye holding Audley Harrison's head, believe it or not, while he's hitting him with right hands. It's not a clean knockdown, right? After the knockdown, Audley gets back up. David Haye, of course, comes over. Audley's so badly hurt on the knockdown, keep in mind that Audley's mouthpiece falls out. David Haye comes back over and again just jumps in, right? He's a jumper. He jumps in and then, is able to finish the job. The referee steps in to stop the fight. Now, we already know how to beat a fighter with Roy Jones's fight style. In fact, the best tape that I know of is Glenn Johnson's victory over Roy Jones. Keep in mind, this is different than Tarver's knockout win over Roy Jones, or even the, third Tarver match. The Glenn Johnson match is methodical because the way to beat a guy who needs that 2 to 3 foot cushion, who needs to stand outside of your jab and doesn't want to engage you and doesn't want to get up on you like a Mike Tyson would, like a Roberto Duran would, right? The way to beat a Roy Jones type guy, and we saw it, by the way, in the recent Bernard Hopkins-Roy Jones rematch, is to do what Glenn Johnson did. Not fall for the feints, not even pay attention to the feints, to literally be able to have your guard up. So if the punch that the feints threaten comes, you're able to block the punch. And of course, Glenn Johnson literally walks down Roy Jones. He's in Roy Jones's face. He dictates the tempo of the fight. Keep in mind, the feinters don't throw a lot of punches in the rounds. They actually take breathers. They're outside, right? They're just looking for openings. They're not throwing jabs. They're not throwing combinations from the outside. They're waiting for an opening so they can leap in and then try to hit you with hard shots. So what Glenn Johnson did was he beat the feinting by ignoring the feinting, coming forward as only Glenn Johnson seems to be able to do these days, right? Glenn Johnson, I guess Andre Ward, a few others, the guys who literally can walk you down and come inside. Glenn Johnson comes inside, has a high guard. So, whenever Roy Jones throws, the punch is hitting Glenn Johnson's forearm. Also, watch Johnson carefully. It's not just the hand he has up, because of course sometimes he's throwing the punch, leaving himself exposed on the side where he throws the punch. Glenn Johnson also uses his shoulder to hide his chin underneath his shoulder. Also, Glenn Johnson has a little vertical game going where he comes in, right? He's ignoring your feints. He comes in, as he throws a punch, knowing that he's going to leave himself naked on that side. Johnson is smart enough to duck his head so that if a punch is thrown, that punch doesn't hit him. Johnson will also bend down so that you can't really place his head. His head is not there for the highly accurate sharpshooters that guys like Roy Jones, David Haye, and Jean Pascal are. Let me just say, there is a heavyweight version of Glenn Johnson. He's heavy. He's also unbeaten. And that's Audley Solis. And I believe, based on what I saw in the Audley Harrison, David Haye fight, I believe Audley Solis, who keeps a high guard, who comes forward, right? He's not wasting time standing back like Audley Harrison. You don't want to be in no man's land like Audley Harrison was, right? He's coming forward. He's forcing a guy like, a David Haye to back up, to, realize that he's come to fight, and he has a high guard. So the choices are for the Roy Joneses and David Hayes of the world to either throw punches to his body, which would leave them open, or try to figure out a way to get around a tight guard. Roy Jones fought Antonio Tarver 3 times. Interestingly enough, the most devastating knockout of his career, in my opinion, Glenn Johnson, he never fought Glenn Johnson again. And look at Glenn Johnson's history since that fight. Glenn Johnson has been, fighting in big fights since that fight. And yet Roy Jones, while even fighting Bernard Hopkins again, never agreed to fight Glenn Johnson again. I believe Jones, who I consider the master of this style, figured out that Glenn Johnson's style really gave this style problems. If a fight is announced between Haye and Audley Solis, my advice to you is to tread carefully, because Solis, I believe, would pose real problems for Haye. It's the ultra-cautious fighter who actually is looking at Haye's feints and who doesn't want to step forward aggressively. In other words, Nikolai Valuev doesn't have the foot speed to step forward aggressively. Audley Harrison, same thing, who ends up like Harrison, right? I believe a Lanier would walk him down. I think a Vladimir Klitschko-David Haye fight would be fascinating, because Klitschko is a different type of fighter who works behind a jab. And I believe that, David Haye is banking on being able to dodge that jab and just leap in against a guy, quite frankly, who's been down several times. Also, look at David Haye's feet. They're very wide apart. I know he moves well. But understand, a fighter who is fighting David Haye and wants to beat him needs to win the foot battle. In other words, they have to have David Haye backing up so his feet aren't cocked for him to throw that very hard right hand of his. I think Audley Solis gives David Haye problems. I think David Haye doesn't fight in style. David Haye doesn't fight well inside. I think the most telling moment of this fight is early in the 3rd round when David Haye has Audley badly hurt. And then, of course, backs up off the ropes. Doesn't want to fight inside. He's not Marvin Hagler. He literally backs up off the ropes 2 to 3 feet to give Audley Harrison room. That's the kind of thing that I believe could work against him in the long run. Let me also say something I've said before. The guys who can fight inside, the public seems to feel they would not stand a chance against David Haye. I'm just here to tell you, Bernard Hopkins beat Roy Jones. He would have a chance against David Haye, even with the size difference. So too would Evander Holyfield, even with the age difference, because Holyfield can fight inside. Thanks for watching.